about rezoning of Edwardsville's downtown. So sometimes rezoning a single parcel can be controversial and result in a room full of angry people and stressed out planning staff. But with the right mix of optimism, balanced development goals, and plenty of time put into engagement early in the process, even a large-scale rezoning process can go smoothly. The City of Edwardsville recently updated its zoning code, writing 3 whole new sections for the downtown district and 1 for the transition neighborhoods surrounding downtown, and then rezoned 350 parcels to those 4 newly created districts. This presentation will cover the city's need for updated zoning districts, the outcome of the project, how it was managed, and lessons learned along the way. So now I'd like to introduce Emily Fultz, our speaker for today. Emily serves as city planner for the City of Edwardsville, Illinois, where she oversees long-range and current planning activities. Emily has 15 years of experience in public sector planning at the local government level, working as Director of Economic Development and Planning for the City of Belleville and Director of Community Development for the City of Columbia. In addition to her role as city planner, Emily is an adjunct instructor at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville in the Department of Geography. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master of Science degree in Geography, both from SIUE. And so now I will hand it over to Emily.
Thank you, Christy. So I have quite a bit to present today, all about our downtown rezoning project, and I have left plenty of time at the end for questions. I think there'll be some good questions come out of this. So please, hold those questions till the end, and we'll hopefully have time for a good discussion after this presentation. So just to start, if my mouse will work. To start, I want to give a brief project history and talk about what led to our downtown rezoning project. So I started with the city in 2018. In 2017, before I started with the city engaged Tesca Associates out of the Chicago area to do a code analysis. So in that code analysis, they did a technical report, which is really a detailed review of our land development code, which is essentially our subdivision code, our zoning ordinance, and they looked at the sections in those ordinances to see if there were any discrepancies, if the language read clearly, if they were easy to use, or if anything was out of sync with current state statutes or any best practices. They also did a policy report for us where they reviewed the city's comprehensive plan and provided a report on whether our established policies and our comprehensive plan were whether they were in sync with also our land development code and our zoning code. And so this led to a final assessment where they talked about outcomes of their study and next steps. And one of those next steps was an overhaul of the B1 district in the city. So our B1 district is our central business district, and they talked about the need to update the zoning code, rezone properties, and make sure that our development regulations were really in sync with the long-term vision for that area. So our B1 text originally in our old code is what I imagine most of your zoning codes look like. I know at places I've worked previously, zoning codes were really similar to what we had in Edwardsville. The purpose statement talks about a pedestrian-oriented downtown district. It talks about retail and service uses in the core of the city. And it really doesn't have a lot of bulk regulations. So minimum lot area, we had none. We had a minimum lot width of 25 feet at the building line, but we didn't have any regulations for the building on the lot. So there was no standard as to how far the building could be set back. There was no standard as to height. There was no standard as to architectural detail or historic significance or character. And there was no standard for floor area ratio or building lot coverage. So it was really just kind of a free-for-all. Our uses were probably similar to a lot of other districts as well. We permitted uses that have to do with services, with restaurants, with dining, offices, people catering to walk-in traffic. And like many other codes, our residential above the first floor although that's something that we really wanted, was only permitted by special use. So we had a few guiding questions as we embarked on the planning process. And those were, do the downtown zoning regulations adequately reflect the desired form and character of development? So we started to place a lot of emphasis on the building form and the building character and how that contributes to our downtown district. We asked what were the priorities for preserving historic character and structures, and how is this balanced with new development? We asked about the increasing development intensity, so height and density, and whether doing that would advance strength and support a vibrant district. And I'm sorry, I messed up that question. We asked, would increasing development density, so height and density, would that advance strength and support a vibrant district, or would it endanger its character? And finally, we asked, would a higher level of control on design of new buildings in downtown be acceptable? So is it acceptable for us to go from relatively no control to a really highly regulated form of development in the downtown area? And what would that do long term? So in terms of our process, we established a zoning advisory group. This was essentially our steering committee for the whole process, and they worked with us really from the beginning to help us determine what we wanted to do for public engagement through adoption of the code. We did public engagement, we established what our findings were, we refined the direction that we were going with our code update, we drafted our new code, adopted the new code, and finally rezoned property. So I'll make my way through all of these things during this presentation, providing much more detail on these items. In terms of public engagement, we had some really fun activities, I think. Draw Downtown was one of my favorite activities. As we started talking to people and talking about the process of what we were doing and the need to implement some new development regulations for downtown, we realized that everyone had a different idea of what downtown was. So we did this exercise where we handed out aerial images to our elected officials, to our zoning advisory group, which again was our steering committee. We did this with city staff, because even among city staff in the planning department and the engineering division, we all have very different ideas of what downtown is. So we realized early on that we needed to establish a clear and common understanding of that term. So I have a few images here, and we didn't put names on these because we wanted people to, not feel any shame if they thought downtown was very small or very large or in a totally different area than a lot of us imagine it to be. So you'll see what the differences are here. So our main street, I'll just use my mouse to point. This is what I consider kind of the heart of downtown here at Vandalia and Main Street. And this is a block of, on the east side, really well intact and preserved historic buildings. And it goes pretty far north. And as you get north, it gets less dense, more residential in nature. So you see some people include that in downtown and some people don't. Most everyone includes this node as part of downtown though. This person just thinks either side of the street is downtown. And so we got some interesting responses. I think they're trying to tell us that part of this is the core and part of it is the periphery. So it was a really good exercise to get everyone talking and get their minds on, thinking about what downtown is, what it should be, and what it could be. The next thing we did a downtown walking tour. And we developed this to do with our steering committee, so with our zoning advisory group, and we asked them to meet with us for about an hour and a half. And we met at City Hall and started walking. We walked all around downtown. We stopped, we talked as a group, and we thought it would be good to also offer this to the public. I know several people who did this before they came to our open house, actually, and they were kind of in that mindset and ready to talk about things they saw and their experience walking around downtown. And they were a little more informed than maybe they would have been otherwise. So we had some ground rules for this walking exercise, and we mostly just asked people to experience downtown with all of their senses. So we asked them to not listen to music. We wanted them to listen to the sounds of, the traffic or the street or the music from a local bar or restaurant. We wanted them to pay attention to, the shady side of the sidewalk. Is it cool in one area? Are you shaded by trees? Is it too hot? Pay attention to those things. Pay attention to what you can see in the distance and also up close. So we really wanted them to experience downtown, like I said, with all of their senses. So we started out, and I'll just go through stop number one, the kind of questions we asked. So we asked people, here's City Hall, and you'd stop at this first intersection to look at the courthouse and the county administration building that are across the street. How does the newer county administration building reflect and respect the old? Is this important? Is it important to respect and reflect the historic architecture? What do you think of the scale of these buildings? Are they too small, too big, just right? Are they too close to the street or too far away? So we're using language that is just plain terms, right? We're not talking about setbacks. We're just saying, are they too close or too far from the street? And then we ask people, as you walk up Main Street, notice the buildings, the landscaping, the businesses, and think about what you like and dislike. So this is just a shot from Google Maps of stop number one. And it's what you see when you look at the old courthouse and the new county administration building on the right. And we asked people, and we stopped with our zoning advisory group here. And, at first there wasn't a lot of conversation about what's similar and what's not similar, aside from the building height. But when you really start paying attention to the architectural details on these buildings, you can see, for example, that the mullions in the windows are very similar. That the old courthouse has some vertical articulation here with columns, and they've carried that over into the new county administration building with spacing between windows and vertical articulation in the building facade. They're both about setback about the same distance from the street, and this picture doesn't do a great job of showing it, but there's quite a bit of trees along here, and we think that these trees matter a lot. That actually came up during our zoning advisory group walk, and people said, it would look too far if those trees weren't there. And trees and landscaping came up quite a bit during our conversation. So we realized that was something that was really important to address when we developed the new code for downtown. This is another image of our zoning advisory group, and these pictures are a little bit crooked, so please excuse that. But what you'll see here is Park Plaza, which is on the left side of the screen in this picture, and it's a 3-story building. And you can see the awnings, the first story, the second story, and the third story very clearly identified from the exterior. It's very pedestrian in scale. And then this building on the right is called the Park Street Plaza building, and it is actually a 5-story building, although it was made and kind of stretched out, made to look like a 3-story building. So you can see here that the signage for the first floor is what would naturally be about the second floor, and then the signage for the what is actually the 4th floor looks like it's signage for these businesses that may be located on the second. So it's my understanding that it was done that way as kind of a compromise, because there was a big discussion about building height and potentially a 5-story building being too tall downtown. As you remember, we didn't have any regulations about height, so someone could have built a 10-story building, and we wouldn't have had a way to stop that as long as they were meeting all of our other development regulations. And you'll even see here as people are standing in front of this building, notice how tall this is here. I mean, the door is actually this tall, but this whole entryway is much taller than what we would normally consider a pedestrian scale. So we had a lot of conversations about pedestrian scale, about building setbacks, about naturally being able to tell whether a building is 3 stories or 5 stories from the street, and whether those details matter and why they matter. So following that walking tour, we went into a workshop, or an open house rather, And we actually had a fantastic turnout for this. We had lots of boards where people could write down their thoughts on buildings downtown. And we wondered whether we should actually go through with this, because we thought, well, what if a developer or an architect who designed one of these buildings shows up and there's, all these comments about, we don't like this architecture. And ultimately, we just decided to go with it and decided that that would be a moment for good, thoughtful conversation. And we would try to make it as meaningful as possible and all learn something from it. So we went with it. And ultimately, I think it was the right decision. We got some of those comments, but the builders of those buildings weren't here. We still talked about them, very respectfully and in a meaningful way. So I think everyone learned from that. But we also had some flyers on the tables where people could fill out. We had a Mad Libs type exercise. We had some paper that said, "Dear Mayor, I feel this way about downtown." And of course, we didn't hand them directly to the mayor, but when people think they're talking to someone who has all the power, then they want to tell them what they really think. So we framed it that way. Just some more photos of the of our open house. And you'll see on these boards, we're actually asking people comment on the height, the architecture, other characteristics of these buildings. So what do you like? What don't you like? And you see people are writing about the need for trees, the importance of architecture, how well things were renovated, that it seems to fit in with the historic tradition of historic Main Street. This building on the right here is actually a brand new building, and it looks like it's 3 stories from the front. I think I have a picture on the presentation later where we're down the street looking back at this building, and the top 2 floors of this are actually stepped back 25 feet. So it's a 5-story building, but it appears as 3 stories. They've got a nice terrace up on this 3rd floor. Also, it's a good, benefit for folks in the building. So people really liked this building. There was a lot of people that used this as an example and as a standard of what development or redevelopment in the downtown area should be. We have some more comments here about architecture and other characteristics, about these, not being interesting buildings. They need to spruce these up a little bit. And then here, this building on the right that we've talked about, you can see a little better in this picture how it's really not quite at pedestrian scale. You've got awnings here, but the building naturally looks like it breaks for the 1st floor at the 2nd floor. And so these are some of the comments. So people love the street level retail, but they feel that it is very too tall. That is very tall. They hate the building. They think it's a tragedy and obscenity. However, somebody thinks it's also the perfect building. So we're getting lots of different ideas on this building. And this was talked about at length throughout the process as something that was good and bad. And really, it was a good thing to have, a good example to have in town for people to reference, because it really it allowed people to talk about things using real world examples that they know well and that they have a lot of familiarity with. So public engagement, I think, was a huge success for this project. We had a lot of people there and a lot of people talking, all about downtown and their vision for downtown and how it could be better. And we tried to frame a lot of these conversations in a really positive way. Stating that we've seen a lot of redevelopment, there's so much interest and so many new businesses, and we want to keep that going and make sure that, development in the future is in line with the existing character of the current development. This is one of our Mad Libs type exercises where we just added some blanks and asked people to fill them in. So we asked people how the buildings felt to them, which buildings they liked, which don't fit in, and why. And so this was a good way to ask questions in more of a narrative way, I think, and get also a response if people didn't feel comfortable just writing on a blank poster board. So what did we learn from public engagement? The survey says trees are important. That came up time and time and time again, how important trees and landscaping are to our downtown area. People said that visual interest like storefronts and artwork were incredibly important to developing a pedestrian character in the downtown. People wanted to maintain historic integrity. There were a lot of conversations about buildings that were developed to keep the character of downtown, of the existing downtown storefronts, and buildings that maybe weren't, that didn't do such a good job with that. People wanted to hide parking. One of the questions on the downtown walking tour was asking people to stop at a certain point and look north of them. There's a parking lot on the right-hand side of the road or on the east side of the road, and ask how they felt about that. The parking lot has a lot of landscaping in the front of it, so it kind of buffers and maintains the street line and the, you know, the difference between the public realm and what would be private property or a parking lot. But we asked people really to think about that, and people responded that they thought it was important to hide parking on the side or behind buildings. Folks thought it was really important to add housing downtown, which we agree with, and they said that architectural details really matter. So what did we do with all of this? We spent a long time thinking and talking about different ideas and how we could move forward with this, writing one code that really dealt with all of our downtown area. And we came to the conclusion that one code was not the answer and that we needed to break this into 3 sub-districts. So on the left on this screen, you see our whole downtown area. The gray background here is what is currently, or what was, our downtown central business district. It was the area that was zoned B1. And instead of looking at this as a district as a whole, we started splitting out and looking at the block faces. So the block face would be this portion of the block that fronts Main Street or that fronts Hillsborough here. And we started noticing differences and similarities in those. And so we developed the B1A subdistrict, which is our central Main subdistrict. It's the core of downtown. It has all of our historic buildings. It has a pedestrian focus. We developed B1B, which is our mid downtown block face. So this is the larger areas where larger development is appropriate. So that 5-story building that was made to look like a 3-story building, for example, is down here in this area. So it's a little bit out of the actual central Main area. And then finally, we have the B1C district, which is our downtown transition block face. So these are the areas that are nearest our residential uses and the areas where we thought it was most important to mitigate potential negative impacts. So we developed bulk regulations for each of these districts. We did say that overall, in the B1 area and all of the sub-districts, we have a 2-story height minimum. So you can't come in today and apply for a building permit to build a 1-story building in downtown. Instead, you've got to have it be 2 stories, both to add commercial density, add the potential for residential dwelling units, and just to add to the critical, population mass that we want to see downtown, and to maintain the building character. So our maximum height in the B1A subdistrict is 5 stories or 65 feet, but we required it to have a step back. So the first 3 stories can be built at the front property line. But then after that, your 2 top stories have to be stepped back 25 feet. So we looked at one building a few slides ago where it was on Main Street, and I said, this is a nice 3-story building, but what you can't see are the 2 top stories. That's really kind of what we're going for along Main Street, because we don't want the field of vision, your line of sight, to be disrupted by a building that looks 2 stories taller when you're looking down Main Street or walking down the street. We have a 0 minimum setback and a 0 maximum setback for this district, so buildings have to be built to the front property line. In the B1B subdistrict, however, this is where we allow a little bit larger buildings. We do allow 5-story buildings, and you can build them basically on a single plane as long as they're set back 5 feet from the front property line. But we also allow them to be set back 20 feet because we want to allow for small plazas or benches or other activities to take place in front of the building if it's desired. And then for our B1C transition area, we limit buildings to 3 stories or 40 feet. And buildings have to be set back 5 feet, and they can only be set back 20. We also threw some development standards into our B1 district. And this was really exciting because these are the things that will really maintain and preserve the character of our downtown area. So we required, as part of our development standards, to provide landscape screening near parking areas. So, and in the downtown area, you're not required to provide parking, but you are encouraged to do so. And we encourage you, if you do so, you are then required to screen it from view with some landscaping buffers. So we also say that building design must illustrate a base, middle, and a top. That's something we talked about quite a bit during our open house, during our focus groups with developers. That's something I've kind of left out of this presentation, but we did have a series of focus groups with developers, property owners, residents of the downtown area, and all kinds of folks who have, you know, kind of been involved in some way or another in downtown. And that's something that came up quite a bit in the architectural conversations. We said that buildings must be discernible from the building stories must be discernible from the exterior, and they must be logically proportioned. This again is a result of the conversation of the one polarizing building that we've talked about. We require people to use horizontal and it should say horizontal and vertical building elements. And we don't tell them what they have to use, but our code says that they have to use them. So these could be things like cornices or awnings or trim, columns, window spacing to create the vertical elements. And finally, we say that active facades are important, and 65% of the first floor of a building has to be clear glass, whether it's an office or some other type of use. That active facade is really important. So this is kind of what that looks like in the code. We actually included the graphic on the bottom of the screen in our zoning code. So there are examples of what a cornice, a molding, a lintel is. So it's there for people to use. This is the building here. I think I misspoke earlier saying it was 5 stories. This particular building is only 4, but where we have the 3 stories and then it's stepped back 25 feet. So that's the one that we use as the example of that step back. So this is actually the code language and what this looks like in the text. So writing the text was, you know, the first half of the exercise here, and then figuring out where we're going to apply it is the second half. So we have our old B1 zoning district on the left, and the black outline is the same that you see on the map on the right. Where it's showing the new zoning district. So the red is the B1A block face, this blue purple color is the B1B, and the green area is our B1C transition area. And you can see that this transition area really abuts a lot of our single family residential in the neighborhoods right around downtown. This is just a Google Maps view of downtown of Main Street. This is the B1A block face. Again, here's this building we talked about. You can see some of the historic architecture here. This is kind of the heart of downtown. You can also see a 1-story building here that seems a little bit out of place. And this is a reason why we're requiring 2-story buildings if someone decides to redevelop downtown, because we want things to fill in at the 2-story level. This alternately is a picture of a downtown transition area where we have things that are zoned B1 on the left and homes that are right across from that on the right. So this is kind of what the transition area looks like. More open space, fewer buildings, fewer stories, lower heights here. And this is just an aerial of our downtown. I thought it was important to show this in an aerial view because you can see, this is where I had the first aerial looking down the street here. And then the other image that I took, I think was back here. So you can see it kind of gets into the neighborhood. But a lot of the area that we zoned B1B right now is area that's parking lots. So there really is a potential for someone to come in and do a development project and add some structured parking and build a building that's maybe 5 stories tall. So there are development opportunities in the areas that are zoned B1B, but B1C, we really did want to protect those areas as we get into neighborhoods. So as we started talking about how we were going to rezone property and what we were going to rezone it to, we sent letters to every property owner and every business owner in the downtown area. And we had an open house at our library. Only 2 or 3 people showed up, believe it or not. But we did mail them. Well, first of all, we refer them to our website, but we mailed them maps. We mailed them the proposed text, the existing text. We mailed them our nonconformities chapter in case someone would have a nonconforming use. We wanted them to try to understand what this zoning change would mean for them. And there really was actually not a lot of interest, surprisingly. So again, this is just the zoning map before and after what our downtown districts looked like. And in addition to our B1 area, what I'll point out here is that we have this B2 zoning classification on our 4 roads leading right into downtown. These are the 4 main corridors that go right into the center of downtown. And our B2 district is what we have called around the office a corridor commercial district. So it requires 50-foot setbacks, parking's typically in the front. This is something where you would see, you know, a Target store or a Deerberg's or something like that. That would fit well into our B2 district. And I think you remember the aerial that I just showed. That's definitely not the existing building stock that we have here. And that type of development is not what we want in this area either. Instead, we have lots of homes that have been converted to offices. We have homes that are still used as single-family homes. We have homes that have been converted to mixed-use buildings. We have a wide variety of uses, but they're all done on a small scale. So we took a look at this area and said we need a whole new zoning district for it because we don't have anything in our code that really addresses it well. So we identified the parcels here in this area, for example, in East Vandalia, that we felt needed to be rezoned. And some of the exercises we worked through, this is a different corridor, but we started to look at, you know, the parking behind these buildings, and we started to kind of see how wide this drive was to get back there. We spent a lot of time on our county viewer and in GIS maps looking at the building width and the lot width. And we wrote this code to say that building width has to be between 60 and 80% of the lot width, because that's what exists right now. The side setback is going to be a little bit flexible because we want you to have a wide enough drive to get to the back of the building and have your parking there. So we really tried to write this district in the mindset that we want to preserve these existing buildings and allow people to continue to use them and repurpose them for businesses in the future. This is an important commercial component of our downtown area. Just because it's not a new building or not a big building doesn't mean it doesn't add character to what we have going on. So this is another area that we rezoned to downtown mixed use. And this is a photo that as we got into this, we had a lot of conversations about building height, building stories, and what people thought was too much. The building that you see in up here is about, I think this is about 35, 36 feet in height from the street to the peak of the roof. This building in the bottom is around there. It tops out at around, I think 38 feet for this building. So they look very different though in terms of their massing. And this is something that we had a conversation with residents about and elected officials about toward the end. And we ended up adding a section as a compromise in the end saying that if you're going into a transition area and you're building a new building or redeveloping a lot that is surrounded by other homes, your roof lines have to be similar. So if this building had a pitched roof, for example, or were done in a different architectural style, it would blend in much better to this neighborhood. They're in different neighborhoods, so I'm just using that as an example of something that we picked up on that was a big deal to residents, and I think it will ultimately reflect our existing neighborhoods better. But we did go out and we actually had our surveyors, engineering staff go out and get the height of these buildings from the street level, so we can have a real conversation and use real numbers about what exists, because people think, oh, this building is going to be 4 stories or, you know, this many feet. They don't really have a sense of feet and stories and what that looks like on the ground in a neighborhood. So in addition to all of these updates that we've done so far, we had to make a lot of consequential updates to our zoning code, right? Because our purpose statements didn't address the MU1 district. Our parking requirements talked about parking for R1 single family residential zoned properties and for properties zoned for business, but it didn't talk about mixed uses. We talked about our code has a table for how a property from Madison County comes into the city when it's annexed and what zoning district it goes to, and none of our new zoning districts are included in that. We talked about fences and when a PUD is required, and there are several more updates that we made just to make sure we were using the same language throughout. Definitions is another big section that we updated. When we updated our uses for the downtown district, we modernized the terms. And although we didn't go through and modernize those terms in our B2 district or our manufacturing district, we're saving that for another time. We felt that it was important to update when, where we could, get the definitions up to date and use some modern language there. So this is what our zoning map looks like today. We were running out of colors, so it's very bright, but you can see our three downtown zoning districts, and we've successfully gone through and rezoned our major corridors coming into the downtown area. The next one we're going to tackle is this north part of Main Street. So, overall, it's taken quite a significant amount of time, a couple of years, so don't underestimate that. But it was a good process. I think we, were able to frame things in an optimistic way, talking about the future of Main Street and the continued development. We had some really good examples of good architecture and good redevelopment projects, and we talked about wanting to continue that. And I think that got people interested and got them to buy into the fact that this was something that was needed. In terms of lessons learned, expect the unexpected until the very, very end. In Edwardsville, our ordinances require 2 readings, and it goes to our Administrative and Community Services Committee and then to City Council. So that's the committee and council level for 1 read, and then we repeat the same thing, committee and council for the 2nd read. And on the 2nd read at committee, I actually had an elected official come to the meeting with probably 15 people from a neighborhood trying to squash the whole thing, everything we were doing. And they didn't like anything we wrote, didn't understand why it was happening. It was, I was really caught off guard because I thought, okay, I made it through the 1st reading. That's where the majority of questions take place. I really thought we were smooth sailing until the end, and that was not the case. So it ended up getting tabled. We actually took that elected official. We went on a little driving tour. We stopped. We talked about buildings all over the downtown area. We reached out to residents individually, talked with them at length. In the end, I think they really understood it. The one elected official voted no, but other people were really on board with what was happening. I think he vocalized in a meeting that he voted no because he thought that 5 stories was just too tall and we couldn't have any more buildings that were that tall, and he was just very much against it. When we really had the evidence to show that people said, this is okay if you do it in this way and step back and it's not overwhelming the core of Main Street. So, that's a personal preference, and that's fine. Finally, meet people where they're at. They probably don't know the language that we use, right? So use common language about, is this building too close to the street or too far away? So I really tried to use very basic, very common language rather than zoning terms. And my other piece of advice would be to address nonconformities. I think we had some success because we were able to talk to people about what would happen if their property was not conforming to our new regulations. So maybe just, if you're going to embark on a project like this, make sure your nonconformities chapter is really up to speed, I guess. So that's what I have. That's an overview, a very brief overview of a very lengthy presentation, or a lengthy process that we went through to rezone downtown. And I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. That was a really great presentation. I found that very interesting. So everyone, we have the chat box over here. If you want to post some questions into the chat, I can moderate for us. So our first question is, what was the time frame that this process took place?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it took about 2 years. It definitely took about, I would say, 12 to 18 months to get the actual text amendments done. But then it took probably 6 months to actually rezone the properties. And we did all of our mixed use areas separately. So these areas that are here in pink, just because of staff time and other things going on, we picked 2 of these and did 2 at a time. And then when those were done, we would come back the next month and do another 2. So, we were able to kind of do it slowly as we got into the mixed use.
So when did this wrap up? Or you said you're still in the process of doing some of the mixed use?
Yeah, so it wrapped up, I think the last mixed use rezoning was done maybe in January of this year. We are still trying to deal with this part of North Main Street, and we've kind of, we've had fits and starts with that as we talk about whether these couple of blocks become a B1C, or whether they become MU1, or how we deal with the first few blocks and then what the rest looks like. Because like I said, it really does get pretty residential up there, but we have had a lot of development interest. Also, we've realized that our MU1 district, our downtown mixed use district, it was really written and intended for these small parcels that you see. I've since talked to someone who's interested in doing a larger project up here that would incorporate a city block. And I have realized it was definitely not written for that scale of development. So we're trying to kind of figure out how we handle that. And we've been honest with elected officials and with the Planning Commission from the beginning, saying, this is going to be a major step in the right direction, but we're going to find things that need to be amended. And so don't be surprised when we come back to you after the first development proposal and say, this doesn't work and we need to change it.
Have you had any projects and new developments submitted under the new rezoning yet? Anything going through that process?
No major projects yet. We've had a few remodels. We've had a few, smaller, one building kind of things on the outskirts, but nothing, no, 5-story buildings that take up a whole city block.
We have another question in the chat. Can you explain a little more about the consultant review that took place before you embarked on the zoning updates? What was the scope of this review, and is it available on your website?
It is, yeah. So all this is on the city website. If you go to cityofedwardsville.com, hover over our government tab, I believe it is. It might be our community. And then you'll see a selection for zoning code update. And I believe that our review, our zoning code review, is all on there. And you can see that it was a detailed review of our zoning code, our land development code, and then just totally lost my train of thought, recommendations for how we need to move forward and update these documents.
So there was a consultant for that portion, but then the rezoning stuff you city staff did by themselves, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I don't think I maybe made that clear enough. So it was Tesca Associates that did the code review and the analysis for us and made the recommendations on how to move forward. So we kept them engaged for the development of the new text. So it was kind of a two-part process. Tesca wrote the text for the B1 area, and then I wrote the text for the MU1 area. And we wrote the text concurrently and took it forward concurrently. So we were looking at the downtown as a whole. So the text amendments for B1 and MU1 all went at the same time. We were working on those projects concurrently, but then it was up to the city to actually rezone the property. So we did that all in-house.
Okay, well, we'll see if we have a few more questions trickle in here. Anytime that I start to say, okay, we have no more questions, I'll wrap it up. I get more questions in the chat, so I'm kind of checking to see if I'll jinx myself here. But I'm sure that Emily would be happy to answer any additional questions you have. I'm assuming your contact information is available on Edwardsville's website. Yep. And yes, this recording will be available later. We are working to get some of the recordings from past luncheons posted to the APA website, so we will be able to share this. And like Justin said at the beginning of the presentation, our next luncheon is on October 20th. Let me double check that. Yep, October 20th on transit-oriented development and bus rapid transit. And I think that is a wrap for today. So thank you so much, Emily, for a great presentation.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.